Good afternoon. I'm Dean Thompson. I'm a resident here at Monte Vista Grove. It's a privilege to welcome you here today, you in person, as well as our online audience. Thank you, Rebecca Thompson, for your wonderful prelude. We could have heard that played on a harpsichord back in Quincy Adams' day. Our traditional hymn, scripture, and prayer will be included in our speaker Ron White's presentation based on the faith story of John Quincy Adams. Ronald C. White is the incredible author of 2 New York Times best-selling presidential biographies, A. Lincoln, a biography, and American Ulysses, a life of Ulysses S. Grant. He has also written on Lincoln's greatest speech, the second inaugural, a New York Times notable book, The Eloquent President, a portrait of Lincoln through his words, a Los Angeles Times bestseller, and Lincoln in Private, what his most personal reflections tell us about our greatest president. It's the recipient of the Barrondas Lincoln Award. White's 2023 biography on Great Fields, the life and unlikely heroism of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, is a USA Today national bestseller. Ron White is a graduate of UCLA and Princeton Theological Seminary, receiving a PhD from Princeton University. He has taught at UCLA, Whitworth University, Colorado College, and Princeton Seminary. He has spoken on Lincoln at the White House and has been interviewed on the PBS NewsHour. He has lectured on Lincoln in England, France, Germany, Italy, Mexico, and New Zealand. He will speak today on his new biography, Unprecedented, the third act of John Quincy Adams, to be published by Penguin Random House in 2027. Thank you, Ron White, good friend, for being with us today.
Thank you, Dean Thompson, for your friendship and for your marvelous presentation last week on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Yes, our hymn, our scripture, and our prayer all come from John Quincy Adams. Yesterday afternoon, marvelous Rebecca Thompson played 4 different tunes. We weren't quite sure what tune went with this hymn. And as Dean suggested in her research, the music you heard in the prelude was what John Quincy Adams might have heard in parlors in the United States in the 1830s, 1840s. So you have the hymn as a handout. The text is from John Quincy Adams. As he began his time in Congress, he decided he would transpose all 150 Psalms into poetic meter. He was kind of an early version of the Message. And Rebecca and I decided we would use the St. Anne tune for this hymn. So remaining seated, let's sing this hymn together. Quincy Adams' regular practice was to arise every morning at 4 a.m. to read the Bible for 1 hour in many different languages. He knew 9 languages. He then committed himself to read the Bible in its entirety through every year of his adult life. His favorites in many ways were the Psalms, so I'm going to read this afternoon from Psalm 15. O Lord, who may abide in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy hill? Those who walk blamelessly and do what is right, and speak the truth from their heart, who do not slander with their tongue and do no evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors, in whose eyes the wicked are despised, but who honor those who fear the Lord, who stand by their oath even to their hurt, who do not lend money at interest and do not take a bribe against the innocent. Those who do these things shall never be moved. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And this is a prayer offered by John Quincy Adams. Almighty God, from whom all good thoughts, words, and actions proceed, be present with me in thy mercy. Bestow upon me a spirit of gratitude, of humility, of cheerfulness, and of resignation. Be thou, O merciful God, my guide. Give me discernment and perseverance in life, fortitude in death, and the hope and fruition of a blessed immortality. John Quincy Adams wrote this in his diary just after he had suffered a terrible defeat from Andrew Jackson for bidding him to have a second term as president. Just amazing. When I wrote my biography of Lincoln and his second inaugural, I noticed that, to my surprise, in all the previous 15 inaugural addresses, only one time was the Bible ever quoted. Now it's quoted, has to be quoted in today's inaugural addresses. The person who quoted it only was John Quincy Adams. Unless the Lord build the house, those who build it labor in vain. Well, I want to start out with a lot of thank yous. Thank you again, Rebecca, for what you've done. She loaned me this wonderful book on the hymns or the music of American presidents, by which I discovered this hymn and which she then put together with a tune. To my wife, Cynthia, she has to work with the fact that I arrived sometimes not in 2025, but in 1825. And she's my first reader. And to Nancy Mackey, this is the 5th book that we have worked together on together. She is a remarkable editor, and thank you, Nancy, for all you've given to me in these books. But to so many in Monte Vista Grove who offered their encouragement, their interest, I'm very much pleased. Also, when the Huntington Library closed during COVID, I didn't know what I would be doing. Suddenly, San Marino Community Church, not sure if Jessica is here today, Jessica Von Lohr, pastor and my friend, said, why don't you become a scholar in residence? We will offer you an office at San Marino Community Church. So between 7 and 7:30 a.m. every day, I'm there at the San Marino Community Church, a remarkable congregation, and Jessica is my friend. Unprecedented. John Quincy Adams, 3 years after suffering a devastating defeat to Andrew Jackson in his bid for a second term as president, reported to the House of Representatives to enter Congress. In that day, the 22nd Congress only had 213 members, but he was accorded seat 203, right at the back. He was by far the oldest member of the Congress. He came after nearly a half-century of public service. Maybe there's no one who has ever served in more different offices. He served as ambassador to the Netherlands, Portugal, Prussia, Russia, and England. And when he left at age 12, his mother said, you should go with your father. An education in Europe is better than what you can get here. He learned French so well that when the first ambassador from the United States became the ambassador to Russia, The ambassador couldn't speak French, which was the language of the day, so John Quincy Adams, at age 14, became the secretary to the ambassador to Russia because he could speak French fluently. He then served as Secretary of State, perhaps one of the greatest secretaries of state in our history, for 8 years. And in those days, the Secretary of State was far more important than the Vice President. It was a stepping stone to becoming president. He served as president from 1825 to 1829, but he was not an effective president. There were 4 persons running for president that year. He had the second largest number of votes in a terribly contentious election. He finally won, but he could never overcome the opposition of Andrew Jackson and those who ran against him. So, and this is in the handout that I put before you, he decided that, as he said, it is my intention now to bury myself in complete retirement as much as a nun taking the veil. So he decided he would retire because all the previous presidents had retired. That was what was expected of American presidents. You retire and you go back to your home place and you never return again to Washington. Recent presidents have followed that same pattern a little bit differently. They get large speaking fees and retire and build their library and play golf. And I'm asking the question in writing this biography, is this really good for the American democracy? That presidents retire at a fairly young age and all of that experience is lost? Winston Churchill is defeated as prime minister at age 70 in 1945 at the end of World War II. So he becomes a member of the House of Commons. And this happens in Germany, it happens in other countries. People who are defeated for being prime minister, they still stay within the government. But that's not our pattern, and I'm not sure it's been really helpful. Jimmy Carter, you might wish to say, well, he certainly was a remarkable retirement president, not in elective office, but certainly we would want to honor him. But popular culture, have you heard this? I heard it some years ago, that those of us who are 65, 75, 85, 95, 99, 100, well, we don't have any new ideas, and we don't make any new friends, and we don't do start any new pathways. That's what popular culture has really been saying to us. So what drew me to this biography was the question, is it possible that John Quincy Adams at age 64 would chart a new path, would reinvent himself, would become a different purpose? He began his service at age 64. This is also a biography of the American Congress in those days. I was surprised to learn that persons in Congress in those years only served 1 or 2 terms. They were citizen legislators. The first session, Congress is 2 years, we know that, but the first session only went from December to March. You couldn't plant crops in the wintertime from December to March. And then you went home, and you didn't return until December. And then the second session, you went from December to maybe June, but you could get back to your farm or your shop. And so you served 1 term, maybe 2 terms, and then you'd go back to your hometown. You might think this is a better idea for today, and you resumed your regular vocation. John Quincy Adams was 64 years of age. I'm calling this his 3rd act. By that I mean I think the first act was as diplomat, Secretary of State. The second act was as president, and now this 3rd act. I think he had no idea how long he might serve. Would he serve 1 term, maybe 2 terms? He served 8 terms, 17 years, until he died in office at age 80. The average life expectancy at that time was age 40. Well, the 3rd act actually is a fairly popular metaphor today. You probably have heard it. Bill McKibben, the environmental leader, used this term in founding his organization in 2021, saying that people in their 60s and 70s, in 80s, in their 3rd act, had yet much to contribute to American society. Well, in my earlier biographies, I found myself working with the early years of Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Joshua Chamberlain. How many of you have done what I did in your years? You worked with junior high or high school or college students. And you discovered, did you not, that these are the years of formation. That's what makes it so exciting to watch young people grow. Think of your own lives. Whatever age you are this afternoon, was it not when you were 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, that the basic ideas in your life, oh, surely they've changed, but some of the basic values were laid down? So to my surprise, in my latest biography on Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, 5 of the 20 chapters were on those years of formation: family, church, college. The values that laid down so that he did become the hero of Little Round Top. He did become the governor of Maine. He did become the president of Bowdoin College. Those are the values. Well, now I'm switching not only from a different time period, the Civil War, to a much earlier period of I knew literally nothing. How do you get in touch with the formation or the story of older people? When you read John Quincy Adams' diary, you realize that he continually talks about the impediments of his mentality, physicality, all the ailments that he's dealing with. He's always talking about the nearness of death, that he probably won't survive the term, that he can't really speak extemporaneously. Oh, here was a real caveat. He wouldn't like teleprompters. He wouldn't like Chuck Schumer. Did you know a wife of one of the congressmen wrote that although the congressmen wrote their speeches out, they would have been laughed out of Congress if they had not spoken extemporaneously? That was the only way you could speak in Congress. You could not read a speech. No one would do such a thing. You spoke extemporaneously. Well, he could not. So it took him several terms to learn how to speak extemporaneously. He believed it was his responsibility to be at his desk every single day. And I learned that Congress often met on Saturday. Have you watched sometimes in the evening, noon, Congress? There's no one there. Someone is speaking to C-SPAN. Have you ever been in a gallery? No one's there. They were there, right there on the floor. And the galleries each day were packed with people, especially women who came to watch what was taking place, the incredible debating skills and speaking skills of these persons in Congress. One day he was there for 28 hours in a row. Oh, he topped Cory Booker. Another day he was there for 25 hours in a row. It's just amazing to read the story of how he and others are there day by day by day. Well, I want to talk about 3 different aspects of this biography today. I'm only about halfway through. I've never spoken before about a book that's not yet finished, so warning, we don't know how this is going to go. But let me talk about 3 aspects that I find quite interesting and fascinating. The first is his diary. At age 12, he began to write a diary. He would write 14,000 pages of his diary. And he wrote in such small handwriting that he could get 600 words on a page. At one point, he wrote 25 years in a row without missing a day. The diary is the greatest diary in American history. It's just filled with all kinds of fascinating elements, thoughtful observations, what he's reading, what he's thinking, who he's meeting, how he observes. He tells his own story in this remarkable diary. Did he think it might be published? He probably did. He probably thought his son Charles would ultimately publish it. Charles went on to become minister to England under Abraham Lincoln, no slouch himself. And so Charles did publish the diary, but Charles did what he shouldn't have done. He cut out lots of the personal stuff. Fortunately for me, the diary has now been completely transcribed by the Massachusetts Historical Society. And I can sit in Pasadena and evoke that diary day after day after day. I find it just fascinating. He writes the diary from 1779 to 1848, a period of 68 years. It's an unbroken record. It's a treasure trove. As a boy, he dined with Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson in Paris. Later, he knew President George Washington and James Polk. He had dinner with Alexis de Tocqueville when he was visiting from France. He met Tsar Alexander I and George III. He taught at Harvard University briefly. He met Charles Dickens when Charles Dickens came for his famous visit to the United States. And all of this is in that diary. It's just remarkable. But also, I think he must have done this while he was sitting a little bored in Congress. He did character sketches of people. Of Edward Everett, he and his brother Alexander are both reeds shaken in the wind. Of Representative Bynum, a Spitfire Democrat, a small man with a perpetual agony in his face, a dark brow, a livid complexion, a haggard look, and when he speaks, his face is distorted with convulsion. Henry Wise, who you might have met in my Chamberlain biography, who was an ardent secessionist governor of Virginia who challenged Chamberlain at Appomattox, and Wise was really angry about people like John Quincy Adams who were opposed to slavery. So he says of Henry Wise, of his speeches, a motley compound of eloquence and folly, of braggart impudence and childish vanity, of self-laudation and Virginia narrow-mindedness. Well, I won't be giving this lecture in Virginia. I make extensive use of the diary. I just find it absolutely fascinating. Fortunately, as I said, it's transcribed. You can go online and read some of the diary yourself. It's really, really interesting. And you can use search words. So you put in the word Presbyterian, and you will discover something really, really interesting. Well, that leads me into the second part of what I want to say, his faith journey. I'm always asking myself in writing a biography, how might I be surprised? Well, John Quincy Adams has been habitually always pictured as a Unitarian. Now, we have to understand who Unitarians were in that time, not this time. Unitarians were a liberal part of the Congregational Church. And I haven't yet visited the Unitarian Church. I plan to do it in October in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is now Unitarian Universalist. Very, very, very different than the Unitarians of the 19th century. But what I discovered, and others haven't noted, is that on Sunday in Washington, he always went to church twice. He usually went to Second Presbyterian in the morning and St. John's Episcopal in the afternoon. And he would start each diary entry for Sunday by saying, this was the text of the sermon. This is what the minister said. This is the way he said it. He was often pretty critical of the way he said it. And this is the way it applies to me. So, this is the Unitarian minister in Quincy, Massachusetts. Mr. Lunt preached this morning's sermon from Acts 17:21. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. It is the doom of the Christian church to be always distracted with controversy. And where religion is most in honor, there the perversity of the human heart breeds the sharpest conflicts of the brain. The sentiment of religion at this time is perhaps more potent and prevailing in New England than many other portions of the Christian world. For many years since the establishment of the Theological School at Andover, the Calvinists and the Unitarians have been battling with each other upon the atonement, the divinity of Christ, and the Trinity. He wasn't always sure that he liked all the theological controversy. For him, the Christian faith was basically much more about ethics. Another Sunday morning. Indeed, almost the only instruction that I ever gather from the pulpit is humility, and the perverseness of my nature revolts continually against that. Why would you write a diary? Why did Benjamin Franklin write a diary? Because for John Quincy Adams, the diary was charting his own moral progress and his own moral limitations. He is almost savage in criticizing himself. You did not listen last night. You were not respectful. He goes on to say, the Calvinist doctrine of human depravity, as far as it concerns the inspirations of the heart, is, I fear, too near the truth. He wasn't always kind to Presbyterians, but he liked the doctrine of depravity. I have much to answer to before God. I hope not much before man. God forbid that I should glory in anything. St. Paul might glory in the cross of Jesus Christ, for he had labored faithfully and effectively to achieve its victory over the world. But if the cross of Christ was necessary to my salvation, it affords me rather cause for mourning than for glory. Let's look again at the handout to see a little bit more of what John Quincy Adams says. Oh, as often happens, I got ahead of myself. Although this is only the story in one sense of the third act, I want to make the point, and this is why I include this long selection at the beginning, that the parenting of especially his mother, but also his often absent father, always hung over him for the rest of his life. Listen to what Abigail Adams writes to this 12-year-old boy who is in France. These are times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not in the still calm of life or the repose of a Pacific station that great characters are formed. Great necessities call out great virtues. When a mind is raised and animated by scenes that engage the heart, then those qualities which would otherwise lay dormant wake into life and form the character of the hero and the statesman. War, tyranny, and desolation are the scourges of the Almighty and ought no doubt to be deprecated. Yet it is your lot, my son, to be an eyewitness of these calamities in your own native land, and at the same time to owe your existence among a people who have made a glorious defense of their invaded liberties, and who, aided by a generous and powerful ally, with the blessing of heaven, will transmit this inheritance to ages yet unborn. The strict and inviolable regard you have ever paid to truth gives me pleasing hopes that you will not swerve from her dictates, but add justice, fortitude, and every manly virtue which can adorn a good citizen, do honor to your country, and render your parents supremely happy, particularly your ever affectionate mother. Wow, what a letter, unbelievable. Oh, my goodness. Let's use the last of the first page also. John Quincy Adams had retired from the presidency, and in the third year, really, his townsfolk in the neighborhood of Boston suggested he should run for Congress. He would never run for Congress. No one ran for Congress. They stood for Congress. He would never campaign. That was beneath him. That was egotistical to campaign for an office. If the people wanted to elect him, then he would stand by and let them elect him. Then he writes these remarkable words: "My election as President of the United States was not half so gratifying to my inmost soul. No election or appointment conferred upon me ever gave me so much pleasure." Continuing on now with the handout in terms of the faith story of John Quincy Adams. He writes in 1833, and this captures, I think, his ambivalence. "My whole life has been a succession of disappointments. I can scarcely recollect a single instant of success to anything that I have ever undertook. Yet with fervent gratitude to God, I confess that my life has been equally marked by great and signal successes, which I neither aimed at nor anticipated." Now, he often liked to attend Second Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C., which would become, by 1859, part of what is today the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. And he very much liked the Presbyterian preacher. He would go to the Unitarian Church, and he would say something like, well, I really like the theology of the Unitarian Church, but the preacher, nah. Presbyterians, I'm not sure I like the theology of the Presbyterian Church, but my goodness, they have good preachers. So now he goes to hear the pastor, Edward Smith, at Second Presbyterian. Heard Mr. Edward Smith this morning at the Second Presbyterian Church from Ephesians 2:22, in whom ye also are builded together for a habitation of God through the Spirit. Upon this figure of speech in which the members of a Christian church are represented as constituting a temple for the habitation of God, Mr. Smith descanted with some ingenuity, though without much eloquence. he could say things like that. Like most Presbyterian divines, he has a partiality for the writings of St. Paul and takes almost all his texts from them. Then this got put into here sort of by mistake, but it's worth saying. 3 weeks after his entrance into Congress, he wrote, of his reading the Bible, this employs on the average about 2 hours every morning and is delightful occupation. 2 hours every morning to read the Bible now that he's entering Congress. Well, the third thing I want to talk about is the real heartbeat of John Quincy Adams' third act. It is his contesting with slavery. He would come to believe that unless the United States in 1838 named John Smithson, and nobody takes any notice of it, but he does, it will become the fountainhead of the Smithsonian Library. In 1841, a ship is marooned off the United States filled with African slaves called the Amistad. The United States government wants to return those slaves to Spain. John Quincy Adams is asked if he would defend the slaves before the Supreme Court. He has not defended a case in 35 years. He's scared to death to do this. He stands before the Supreme Court for 8 hours in a row and defends the slaves from the ship Amistad and wins the case. It's illegal. These Africans deserve to be free. At his death in 1848, he's getting ready to speak. He's standing at his desk, and suddenly he collapses. In 36 hours, he will be dead. And one of the persons who rushes to his desk and will be one of his pallbearers is a young first-term congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, who deeply admired John Quincy Adams. Thank you.
I have the privilege of circulating the microphone. So, Nancy.
Ron, you've written so many marvelous biographies of great men. Where you are in this story now, what do you admire the most about John Quincy Adams?
Oh my goodness, that's a big question. What do I admire most? I admire first perhaps his honesty with himself. He was very much aware of his own shortcomings. He could be abrasive. He could seem to people to be kind of cold. But I also admired his willingness and ability to grow and to change. I mean, to me, that's the beautiful story of the third act for all of us, that he changed. He was very reluctant to speak about slavery. He never spoke about it while 4 years as president. He didn't speak about it in the first 5 years he was in Congress. But it grew within him. It was in his diary, but not in his public voice. And suddenly he stepped forward regardless of the consequences. And they were dire, death threats. every month. I admire that about him, yeah.
Ron, you just touched at it on the very end. At the beginning of Lincoln's career in Congress, obviously there was something about Adams that touched him just by virtue of how he responded when Adams collapsed and then being a pallbearer. Just trace a few threads from Adams into Lincoln, things that character qualities or perceptions, positions that influenced Lincoln as he went forward.
Thank you, Terry. Well, Adams had given a great 4th of July address in 1831 in his hometown, and he understood that the United States was facing a huge crisis about what kind of nation would we be. For Thomas Jefferson, it was an agricultural nation, it was a states' rights nation, and Adams wanted to make the point that the states didn't sign the Declaration of Independence. They didn't form the Constitution. We, the people, formed the Constitution. So for Adams, it always was about the fate of the Union. That's a phrase I was telling something about. I'm going to speak at the Union League Club in Boston next February, and one that was sponsored by some sort of group of unions. I said, no, this is the Union League. The Union is the way people spoke of the United States. And so he saw John Quincy Adams as perhaps the most eloquent interpreter and advocate of the meaning of the Union. And this is why through every single issue that he deals with in Congress, it's all about the Union, the magnificent unitary meaning of the Union. And this, of course, becomes Abraham Lincoln. He goes back to the Declaration of Independence, which he says is really much more formative than the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is the radical document. The Constitution is the conservative document. The Declaration of Independence tells who we are as a people. So that's, I think, why Lincoln admired John Quincy Adams as he did. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by his teen years in Paris.
Yes.
And who was his mentor or mentors at that time?
Good question. I don't know that I can name who were the French mentors, but he had a life, you hear it in one of the quotations, he had a lifelong passion for the French and the French people. But he also, at that time, he really was struck by both Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson, although later on he would become a critic of Jefferson. And interestingly, I didn't include this in the quotation, he was also a critic of Jefferson's religion or lack of religion. But this is where he learned French, and he just had a lifelong passion for the French people. And of course, they had been the ally of the fledgling American colonies as they tried to find and support their own revolution. Yeah.
Ron, that he received the death threats when he finally came out with regard to slavery.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that sometimes handicaps us is we look to the past as if there were some kind of a sweet golden age.
That's right. Yeah.
And fundamentally, Ron, you've looked at so much of the past, sympathies to your wife, the fundamental lessons that for where we are today.
Well, Tom, in writing a biography, I'm always asking myself, how will I be surprised? I was surprised by all the death threats. We're aware of that sadly today, but I didn't know that he received all these death threats. So I think that he sees Andrew Jackson as an authoritarian takeover of the United States, deathly opposed to him. And this is why King Andrew I became the word that he used to describe Andrew Jackson. So I think that's what is in many ways very conversant with the crisis we're facing today.
Ron,
Yes.
I have a two-part question that on the surface seem completely unrelated, but maybe they're not. Can you speak a little more about his critique of Jefferson?
Mm-hmm.
And B, a little more about his experience in comparing the theology and the practice of the denominations of Presbyterian and Unitarian.
Wow, okay. Well, he came to see Jefferson as not a sincere person, which many people have now come to think that way. He said one thing and did another. He said words that seemed to be what people wanted to hear, but he wasn't sure that he really believed those words. And then he became very much a critic of Jefferson's religion. You know that Jefferson put out his own Bible, in which he cut out all the miracle stories. He did not believe in anything like eternal life. He said one day we will all be sort of deists. That was Jefferson's prediction. So that was not John Quincy Adams. So there's a young woman at the Massachusetts Historical Society who calls John Quincy Adams a cosmopolitan Christian. And by what she means is that he had the ability to see the best and the worst, but the best in the different traditions. So he liked going to St. John's Episcopal. You know that's the kind of church right there by the White House. He liked going to Second Presbyterian. During his time, the Unitarian Church in Washington, which was really based more in an English Unitarian than a New England Unitarian, didn't seem to have any regular slate of ministers. Once, when he was in Philadelphia for a thing, he heard Lyman Beecher, the great Great Awakening preacher. He wanted to hear Lyman Beecher. So he heard Lyman Beecher, but he wasn't too impressed. So, but he was, I like the term, a cosmopolitan Christian. He could see that all of these traditions together, and therefore I'm saying to simply say he's a Unitarian misses the mark. On Sunday in Washington, he was most oftenly at Second Presbyterian and St. John's Episcopal. He always went twice. And then the other remarkable thing is he had a granddaughter, Mary Louisa, who had just turned 7, and again he would come home and say, Mary Louisa read 2 chapters to me today from Deuteronomy. Mary Louisa read 2 chapters. She's 7 years old. She just turned 7. And he sits there, and she reads the Bible to him on Sunday afternoon. But that's the way people read in those days. They read out loud to each other. So he asked his 7-year-old granddaughter to read the Bible to him. I just think that's precious.
That brings this question, Ron. What kind of a father was he? Can you tell in the diaries what his responses were to his family?
Well, I haven't even talked about his wife, who is going to get more exposure as we go along, but he was not always a good father. And she saw that he was not always a good father. Mary Louisa, struggled with the fact that she both admired him and was worried about the ambition driving him. So one of the sons commits suicide. He's on a boat traveling in the Long Island Sound. It seems like he jumped off the boat, and they found his body weeks later. Second son dies of alcoholism at age 31. The third son, Charles, who struggles, the youngest of the 3, who struggles with his father, but does become minister to England under Abraham Lincoln and have his own career. You can see the tug of war going on between the 2 of them. So the mother is not always believing that the father has done what he might have done for these sons. Yeah.
So if the congressional commitment or term or whatever it was a couple of 3 months and then another 3 months a little bit later, what did Quincy do between that time? Was he a practicing attorney? What did he do?
He went back to Quincy, Massachusetts. He planted cherry trees and apple trees and all these things. Oh, I didn't tell you this. He was a great swimmer in the nude. He swam in the nude in the Potomac River. And one day, this female journalist wanted to interview him, so she showed up at the Potomac River when he was swimming. And then when he went back to Massachusetts, he would swim a good half mile. He could walk 4 to 6 miles a day. He would get up early in the morning and start from his home and walk all around the Capitol. He was very much, he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He would read the Bible for 1 hour, and then he'd start reading classical authors in Latin or Greek from 5 to 6. He would stay up till 11 o'clock at night. He just seemed to have a whole lot of energy, even as he got into his 70s. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for welcoming me and letting me do this first attempt at talking about John Quincy Adams.
As is our custom, I'll give you a preview of next week. Sunday's June 1st, and in what I call the secular calendar, it's LGBTQ month, and the Convocation Committee has assigned 2 Thursdays for LGBTQ concerns. And next week, we're reviewing a book which you've been encouraged in the Minders to get a copy of, called Unclobbered. And it deals with 8 texts in the Bible that speak to homosexuality. And we'll set up around tables, and you'll have copies of those 8 texts. It's by a San Diego author, San Diego, who comes out of the evangelical world, is what we heard last night over dinner. I haven't started yet. I'm still on Bonhoeffer from last week. But you're encouraged to get it. There's some copies floating around. Karen Burns is halfway through hers. It'll be more meaningful if you read the book, but come anyway if you haven't read the book, and just be open for discussion. Yeah, so that's next week at 3:45. Thank you. That concludes today. Right, okay. Thanks, Ron.